Round about the 25th of January every year, there are people in places like Honolulu, Miami, Dunedin in New Zealand, places in Australia, Canada, are all saying poems about places like Mauchline, Markirk, Cumnock, New Cumnock, and to them these will be romantic places, but the folk that live there sort of think that they're no in this kind of mainstream of the world. Whereas Burns actually, in writing his poems, proved that you could be in the mainstream of the world.
Oh, the earth the wind can blow, a dearly-loo the west, for there the bonny lassie lives, the lassie I loo best. There wildwoods grow and rivers row, wi' mony a hill between. Both day and night my fancies flicht as ever wi' my Jean.
I mind a story gied to me by an old great uncle of mine, an old great aunt, that our own family was related to Burns. This old aunt was 90 when she died. She was a retired skill teacher, but she had it and good authority that we were related to Agnes Brune, Burns's mother. And I've managed to trace this myself back to John Brune in Muirkirk in 1795.
At the beginning of this century, there were at least 3 families in New Mills who had blood connections with Burns or with his wife's family. And up here at the Crinan Ferm, up the road from here, the Smith family, one of the Smiths of the Crinan, married Jean Armour's sister. So you get these wee things turning up all the time.
I was born 2 miles further up the dune than Burns's monument, and I was born at 6:30 on a Sunday night when the Minishant kirk bells were ringing. I hadn't mind, it was my mother telling me that. They went down with a bowl to the dune and they put some water in the bowl and they christened me with the water out the dune. I still have the bowl yet, that's an antique. So I wrote, "Where bonny dune runs wimpling, first licht o' day I saw, ye December in a hamely button ben. 'Twere 3 miles frae the cottage where, mid January sleet and snow, was born the pride of Ayrshire's famous men." Robbie Burns.
Alan's mentioned been born and christened out the River Dyn. I fished the River Dyn down at Doonholme. That Jens was the house of Provost Ferguson, the employer of Burns's father William. William was there as the head gardener and overseer of Doonholme estate at the time he built the cottage that Burns was born in, and he'd walk the Doonholme road up to his work every day, and he planted all the trees in the estate, all the old mature trees that are there. And when I'm out in the water mending the river bank, I'll be cutting back the new growth on a row of big lime trees that hang over the River Dyn, just where the salmon might be lying. And I feel a wee bit of pleasure and a wee bit of awe every time I do this, because Burns's father planted the trees, and here's me pruning them every spring. That's a leaving link with Burns that I'm awful fond of.
Oft hae I rode by bonny Doon to see the rose and woodbine twine, and ilka bird sang o' its love, and fondly say did I o' mine.
Well, my father was a miner, Billy, and for the last 14 years of his working life, my father used to come in for the pit. My mother would have it in a big raker and all that, and they would be blowing up the lump, and my father would be sitting there, and I was getting ready to go out to my work, and he would recite Burns, and without ever going to Burns' book, I could recite Tam O'Shanter just by listening to my father, and he had a great repertoire, all Burns poems, and he kent them all.
We stayed just about quarter mile from the pit. Well, he went with the pit piece in the morning, you see. But he was always there when the miners come up the pit after the day shift, because they always had a bit of piece for you. And I've always minded when I dug closely, it was a wee collie. Whenever my father stepped in, that dug was lying in the flare and it still started going, it kent his pit. And my mother could say to her, when you go and meet him, and it was sitting at the pit waiting and coming out the pit, you see. These are the kind of things that it can endear you to her home life. So it was just exactly the same as Burns family waiting with their father coming home, you see. He talks about the toil-worn cotter, frae his labour goes. This next, his weekly moils at an end. Collects his spades, his mattocks and his hoes, hoping the morn in ease and rest to spend. And weary o'er the moor, his course this homeward bend. At length, his lonely cot appears in view beneath the shelter of an aged tree. The expectant wee things, toddling, sacker through to meet their dad, with flickering noise and glee. His wee bit ingle blinking bonnily, his clean hearth stain, his thrifty wipe his smile. The lisping infant prattling on his knee does all his weary trials and care beguile, and makes him quite forget his labour and his toil. So that is a beautiful picture.
My memories in Cumnock as a boy were on your day, especially, and hearing the Algians singing the old Scots songs, the old Burns songs, and enjoying these nights, getting it imprinted in me that Burns has something to do with our village and something to do with the interest folk had in poetry. Like the others say, my grandfather was a miner, and yet on both sides of the family there were books that I've inherited, like the poems of Dunbar and Burns, and a heritage of Scots vernacular literature. Books that you wouldn't find in many shelves of the ordinary working man nowadays. And there were men and women that had Burns as part of the tradition.
And not just Burns, Ferguson, other Scottish poets. Even the day I still try and keep up with modern Scottish writers. I've read all Irvine Welsh's stuff, Ian Barnes' stuff, Jeff Torrington's stuff, Lassie Kennedy's stuff, because I think as a race the Scots are poetic, creative and expressive.
Well, I come from Gawston. I'm now staying in your mills, but you never forget where you were born. And this is one of the things that I fairly like about Burns. It's the start of the Holy Fair. Upon a summer Sunday morn, when nature's face is fair, I walked forth to view the corn and snuff the caller air. The rising sun o'er Gawston mears with glorious licht was glinting. The hares were hirpling down the firs, the lavrocks they were chanting, fu sweet that day. Now my wife and I booked this holiday to Switzerland. It was Montreux we were at actually. So we had bought 7 of these wee musical chalets. They were about £1 each. And we were the only 2 Scots folk that were on the tour. And all the English folk were saying, Jock, when you come to the customs, it'll cost you quite a bit of money. So we came to the customs and went up to the table, and the man, he says, well, have you anything to declare? He says, by the way, he says, where did you get that bag? I says, we bought it in Scotland. He says, what part of Scotland do you come from? I says, Ayrshire. He says, Ardrossan. I says, no, inland. He says, Mauchline. I says, no, Gawston. And just as quick, he said, the rising sun o'er Gawston mears, and he never got another word out. I says, with glorious licht was glinting, the hares were hirpling down the firs, the lavrocks they were chanting, and he said, fu sweet that day, and put 3 crosses in our cases, and that was us through the customs.
The Irvine Valley is a lovely place. The bottom bit's wooded and fairly untouched with the plague of forestry that's affecting us, and the top bit's rugged and bare, and peregrine falcons flee in the air and goosanders swim in the burn. There's moorland out by Corse and Cone, and there's the parkland between us and Cumnock that grazes Kye. I grew up there happily. At that time, going up the Irvine and looking at the lake, it meant absolutely nothing. And I was born and reared in a house that sung and Burns songs all the year round. At that time, it was just something I heard. It was in later life I began to read Burns, and knew when I walked by the All Mill Farm, it's not just the All Mill Farm, it's the inn where he stayed, where he possibly wrote the Kirk's Alarm. When I walked by the Castle Hotel, I wonder what Mrs. Moore looked like that stayed there, that Burns kennt that he wrote to. It just keeps changing all the time. because your knowledge becomes greater, so your awareness is greater, so you're looking at things through different een all the time, if you like. So New Cumnock is a place that I've stayed in all my life, but it has never been the same 3 months in a row.
Well, most people associate Flow Gently Sweet Afton with Afton River, that flows down through New Cumnock. There was a discussion for a long while that when Burns wrote this, that wasn't the actual Afton he was talking about. It was supposed to be now, I think, down about the Tarbolton area. I remember one time, a Burns supper, that Alistair Dick was gaining the immortal memory, and he was discussing this, and his words were, "I've seen the other Afton boys. Ah, shuck."
Well, it's a well-kennt fact that Burns came to Irvine in the midsummer of 1781. Things hadn't been so good at the farm at Hame, and he thought he would come and try his hand at the flax dressing. The wee venture didn't last that long, because that was the summer he came in Vineyardy. In the midst of a drunken carousel, Burns disclaimed blame of that. It was Mrs. Peacock that they say cowpower elected Connell, and the heckling shop burned down. He could have gone home awful easily, but no, this is where he went about the town and discovered Templeton's bookshop. There he found the works of Robert Ferguson. And he, more or less, to me, hero worshipped the man. He studied and felt, could he not do that? Well, thankfully, the encouragement was there with Provost Hamilton in Irvine and his son. So the gem, the idea to write in his own Scottish tongue. And as an Irvine woman, I'm awful proud that this idea was nurtured, because, I mean, the whole world knows how well he did writing in his own Scottish tongue.
I think one of the things that we still hae up in the country areas of Ayrshire is the Scots tongue. Now, it gars me grew to hear Burns spoken by folk that ken Burns's poems and spout Burns's poems, but use English instead of Scots. When folk say night instead of nicht, and way instead of way,
you discover it's written in the way you're talking, the way I talk every day. It's been written down that way, so it's easy for me to read, and it's easy to come to, and their nobody can write like him. My family wrote poetry as well. They conversed in poetry and wrote them and sent their wee poems to one another. And I think it still carries on in Ayrshire today, because we at New Cumnock Burns Club was started Scottish Verse Night. And they've been right big rough men working in course jobs, and they've been writing poetry. No particularly good, but they've been writing it, and they certainly read it and enjoy it.
My father, he would recite some of Burns every Saturday night, in whether it was the Golden Lion or the Burns, but finally he found his way to the Wee Train, a pub in Gawston, and all the fellas that he kennt were in the Burns this night, and somebody come into the Burns and said, "Hey, old Sonny's up in the Wee Train," and as quick as Jake Robinson, there was all the Burns, and they were all up to hear my father reciting up at the Wee Train. It just lets you see how popular he was, Billy.
when you hear the poems Tam O'Shanter as it should be done, no the way I've heard it recorded in even the Heartland of Burns, like the Burns Centre, where it's done in an anglicised form just to keep the punters happy, in a kind of anodyne, half-English version. I mean, Burns, when he was writing himself, he's actually quoted in his letters, "These English songs gravel me to death. I have not that command of the language that I have in my native tongue. In fact, I think that my ideas are more barren in English than in Scottish." And this was Burns' own thoughts on the matter. He could think best in Scots, he could write best in Scots, and Scots is a language that Burns should be spoken in.
I was come round about the hill and toddling down in Willie's mill, setting my staff with all my skill to keep me sicker, though leeward whiles, against my will, I took a bicker.
What's that, Faye?
Death and Dr Hornbook.
A great favourite haunt of mine is Willie's Mill, down for Tarbolton. That's where Jean Armour's first twins were born. It was a boy and a lassie. They're built in there and the room's the same yet, bar for the built-in bed. But they're four boys there, I call them the boys, for their mother called them the boys. The mother's dead now, and the boys are from 70 to 85, and they're none of Mary. So it's a great place, Willie's Mill.
And whereabouts is that?
Rune Hid's Hill at Tarbolton, and Willie's Mill's the first on the right. And then you get Tongue on the left, Graffhead on the right, and further up you'll get Lochley, and then round to the right you'll get Moskiel. Corbett a wee Spearson, and that's near Mauchline, and they still open the roads of the corn with a scythe, they cut it with a reaper, then they stook it, and then they put it in a stack.
We didn't big the shoe stocks in this part of the country because we hadn't the climate, so it was all round stocks. And we grew a pickle wheat tea, and the wheat was half a day's thrashing. And the wheat straw was used for thatching the corn stalks. Oh, definitely, the sang corn rigs. I can well understand that because, well, it was my own experience, sort of getting pally with a lassie for a neighbouring place, and it was grand to be kind of courting and stooking corn at the same time.
Corn rigs and barley rigs, corn rigs are bonny. I'll ne'er forget that happy next among the rigs we Annie.
I was born in a wee place called Trubboch, which was a wee mining village. I was actually born in the station cottages, which is between Trubboch and a farm called Rumdoo. Now, between that, there's two lochs, and in one of the lochs, there's curling every year on it. And one of the things I can always remember from my childhood was my mother lecturing me every year, don't go on the ice till the curlers are on it, which meant the ice was bare. So every time I read that Burns' poem, The Vision, where it says the sun had closed the winter day, the curlers quat their roaring play, and hungered mocking stain her way to Kale years green, while faithless snow is outstep betray where she has been. That's my connection to my childhood, just reading that one verse.
I consider myself fortunate as a wee lassie. My family were all Burns orientated, but where I really scored was my teacher. This was at John McGregor, and he really thumped it into us, but we wanted to have it thumped into us. There's no doubt about it. I remember often and often heading down New Street in Irvine, the 9 o'clock train, and I'd be running along there saying, "Is there for honest poverty that hangs his head," and all that. You had to know it off by heart for John McGregor. So my love is like a red, red rose. I remember him yet standing singing it to try to teach us the tune, Ye Banks and Braes. Just about every Burns song imaginable. Scots Wi he was so stirring with that he couldn't help but stir the Wednesday that we would get up the road, Scots Wi he with Wallace bled. We had to put feeling in it. But he was a man that inspired me. He was a true Burnsian. His heart was the pear tie that made him richt or rang.
The tune that most folk ken, My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose Day, didn't come into existence in 1836. The tune that Robbie Burns kent himself, Major Graham Inchbrackle, I play that tune. I learnt that tune as a kid because I had an uncle that sung it. He really was very much a critic when I was learning, because I used to prop the music book up for Nent, the HP sauce bottle. My father used to tell me that, but no feeling into that boy. No feeling whatsoever. Instead of reading off the music, you had to put your heart into your music.
After the war was by, I was sent back to Bradford for a course to become a clerk. And the Japanese war finished at that time. We were given a 24-hour pass. So I came home to Gawston and the cross was crowded. And just at the council buildings, they were all crying for my father, "Come on, Sonny, get up and recite an appropriate poem." And I was standing down on the ground on the pavement just below him. And he had such a good drink. And he's saying, "When Wild War's deadly blast was blowing, and gentle peace returning," I says, "we money a sweet babe fatherless,
And somebody says, I'll go up there and help him. I'll say, I'm not going up there to help him, say, he'll forget it as soon as I tell him. Well, that's the soldier's return. When wild war's deadly blast was blown and gentle peace returning, with many a sweet babe fatherless and many a widow mourning, I left the lines in tented field where lang had been a lodger, my humble knapsack, all my wealth, a poor but honest soldier. A little licht heart was in my breast, my hand unstained with plunder, and for fair Scotia hame again, a cheery on did wander. I thought upon the banks of Coyle, I thought upon my Nancy, I thought upon the witching smile that caught my youthful fancy. And my father would never have had mine of that. For he had had too much to drink, which you could quite understand. They were all celebrating. The cross was through that night, Billy. I can mind it as though it was yesterday.
I was born and brought up in a wee miner's row called Hide Row. And I left the school on the 21st of August, 1931. And I was in the pit on the 22nd of August. And I can always remember my father. When he said to me, when I left the school, he says, what are you intending to do with yourself, sir? So I think I'll be a miner. Ah, well, he says, I'll tell you one thing then. The leg ye as much on a Friday as bring you back on a Monday. But the Burns side it came because every house in the row had a Burns book. And I was lucky to my eldest brother, John, who died in Canada. And when I was a boy, when I came in for the school, John was in for the pit and we got the Burns book out. We read Burns extensively because it was actually the same sort of life as what we led.
It was their only entertainment and it would be their education as well, because they would read their Burns. And just when you come to a bit full of prake, what's all your jargon of your skills, your Latin names for horns and stools? If honest nature made you fools, what says your grammars? You'd better ta'en up spades and shills or napping hammers. A set of dull, conceited hashes confuse their brains in college classes, the gang in stirks and come out asses, plain truth to speak, and sign the think to climb Parnassus by dint of Greek. Give me ye spark o' nature's fire, that's all the learning I desire. Then, though I drudge through dub and mire, it plew or cared, my muse, though hamely in attire, may touch the heart.
Well, the hardships of the mining industry. For instance, there in this village here where we are in Springside today, I can remember a boy being killed in the pit, 15-year-old. It was a real tragedy. And the conditions weren't what they should have been. And they ta'en it to the court, you know, blaming the company, of course. But they won their way with it. So they decided that to finish up, they would pay the funeral expenses. And they assessed it. But that boy was 15 up to maybe been about 20, if he'd been married or anything like that. And they got £90. That was what his life was worth. And Burns could challenge them. He says, if I'm designed yon lordling's slave, by nature's law design, no by God's law, nature's law, why was an independent wish here planted in my mind? If not, why am I subject to his cruelty and scorn, and why has man the will and the power to make his fellow mourn?
My feelings about who Burns should be recited, it goes back to that wee bit that I quoted, my muse, though hamely in attire, may touch the heart. And if you're reciting Burns, you can't recite Burns just out of your head. If it doesn't come for your heart and up through your head, it's no worth saying, because it must touch the heart, because Burns touched the heart all the time.
Just a few lines of Burns, Billy, that helps you at times with a personal tragedy, and when I hear this it brings it back to me, and I can take some solace for this.
Bonny wee thing, canny wee thing, lovely wee thing, worth a mine. I would wear thee in my bosom, lest thy jewel I should tie.
Wishfully I look and languish in that bonny face of thine, and my heart it's tuned with anguish, lest my wee thing werena mine. Wit and grace, and love and beauty, in ye constellations shine. To adore thee is my duty, goddess o' the soul of mine.
What is it makes that especially significant for you?
Well, the personal tragedy of the loss of a daughter that I never had, and I still do her with all my heart.
Nae treasures nor pleasures could make us happy lang. The heart's aye the puit, aye, that makes us richt or wrang.
Robert Burns wrote about the people, the common people. He exalted them from obscurity into immortality, as far as I'm concerned. Some people say, oh, he was a dreamer. Well, let's hope that his dreams come true. The golden age will then revive. Each man will be a brother. In harmony we all shall live and share the earth together. In virtue-trained, enlightened youth shall love his fellow creature. And future years shall prove the truth that man is good by nature. Then let us toast with 3 times 3, the dawn of peace and liberty.